Monsters invaded the Earth and attacked humans. Since then, people began to live in a world where the unlucky were eaten. Monsters had advantages because of the great difference in power between them and ordinary humans. At least until the early 1600s, when humanity finally began to react in hopes of protecting civilians. At that time, the United Nations troops for monster hunting, also known as Shretu, security was guaranteed. Then came the soldier of Shretu with the greatest feat. His name was Ian. He could become an Oper. It is the term used to refer to the most honored individual in the world. Ian stood out as a member of Shretu who possessed unimaginable loyalty and strength, was one of the candidates to become Oper. He was special even among the highly competitive candidates, but Ian betrayed the syndicate and eliminated all his comrades. Later, the incident was called Mudo eradication. An officer named Sama watched Ian carefully and suspected that the cause of the incident was his weak mentality, unable to adapt to the army. In total, 6 people participated in the eradication of Mudo, including Ian. All of them were his teammates. After the incident, the Shretu no longer worked as it should. Humanity became trapped again. Even with survivors, the suffering only worsened and the places where the monsters passed were reduced to ruins. In the midst of this chaos, a new person emerged. At the time, he was just a child being protected by his mother. Even so, he suffered brain damage from a monster attack. The result was that he could no longer feel any emotion. The scene changes to 1849, 36 years after the eradication of Mudo. 2 people were walking around Eimer. One of them is the boy who has no emotions. He is our main character named Jin Chiong. The protagonist warned his mother that the best thing would be to eliminate these things, but she was adamant and said she would not do it. At that moment, they were suddenly surprised by a monster. The protagonist's mother ran and asked Jin to run away, but he stood still and drew his sword. Jin said he wasn't going to run away because he could get further away from his destination. Then he jumped into the air with the sword in his hand and hit the monster, then finished with a powerful cut on the tail. The woman checked if he was okay. She couldn't help him because of his terrible physical condition. Jin assured him that he was fine, but he was out of patience with the fact that his mother was so afraid. He said that she could never convince a killer that way. Maybe she can't even look Ian in the eyes. Now the protagonist doesn't feel confident that they will be able to convince him. Maybe they need to eliminate Ian? There's no way to fix a villain like him. His mother yells at him to stop talking like that, because a person's life is not a joke. Jin felt that it was all Ian's fault, because he's in that state. After all, the man eliminated all the soldiers who protected the population. The protagonist is only trying hard because his mother wants to take him to the past and convince Ian not to start eradication. Jin thinks it's impossible. His mother knows he thinks so. The truth is that Jin thinks it would be easier to just murder him, but for some reason his mother wants to take the hard way. Suddenly the woman shouts that they have arrived. Jin looks at the building while being informed that this is where the legendary Midwood is. He can take them back to the past. The woman ran to the building and went up the stairs. The protagonist followed her even without understanding anything. He did not believe there was a way to go back in the past, so he just obeyed his mother, but asked what she would do if this Midwood is not in the building. The woman made it clear that she was not going to give up. At that moment, the more they climbed the steps, the harder it got. They finally find the room and enter. Jin carefully notices a blue sphere. He wonders how a legendary item cannot be hidden. Your mother says it's good news. Now they don't have to look for it. The goal is to eat the orb and go back to the past. Jin, he didn't understand how the two would eat that sphere. He thinks about splitting it in half, but the woman yells at him not to do it. She's sure they can get back together if he eats it, and she holds him, so the woman hugs him. The protagonist feels that his mother is acting very strangely, but it's not the first time. Then he obeys the woman's request, and when he is about to eat the orb, something happens. His mother is dragged by a monster, and he falls to the ground. Jin wonders how he could not feel the presence of the monster. Besides, the whole place is full of them. It seems that they gathered because Jin tried to eat the Midwood. They probably felt the energy of the legendary item. At that moment, the woman suffers an almost fatal damage. She had her body pierced. With the last strength, the protagonist's mother shouted for him to eat the item and leave. Jin hesitated, but his mother begged him to obey. The protagonist was not sure if he could leave without his mother. He only went there at her insistence. The truth is that Jin didn't care about the suffering of humanity, but his mother wanted everyone to have peace again. In this case, the protagonist thinks that the best thing to do is wait for the end to come to him too. The boy lies on the floor waiting for a monster to attack him. His mother screams, asking what he is doing. Suddenly, an explosion knocks down all the monsters. The woman builds up the strength to get up. Suddenly, they notice a newcomer next to the fallen monsters. Jin wonders if that is Ian. He stands motionless looking at the man. On the other hand, his mother gets up and goes to Ian. The protagonist is surprised and assumes that his mother already knew Ian, so she insisted on convincing him instead of eliminating him. But what Jin doesn't understand is how this man got there. At that moment, his mother asks Ian to help her son, but the soldier fatally hits her in the neck. Jin looks at his mother in shock. Suddenly, Ian approaches him holding the sword. The protagonist understands that he will be next. He can't let it happen, so he immediately swallows the orb. Ian tries to stop him from doing it, but it's too late. The protagonist tells the man that he did it because he doesn't like to feel pain. His body disappears after these words. Jin goes back to the past after 15 years of searching and 7 years of searching. He thought about giving up when he lost his mother. That sword seemed very painful. Now he is falling into a blue space, not knowing what he will find. Suddenly his body lands on the ground. Jin expected to be sent to the registry office of Shretu in 1820, but looking closer, he realizes that he is at the headquarters of the Shretu. It is a very beautiful place. Different from the one Jin knew, the protagonist looks at the enchanted temple. Many passers-by pass by the place. The protagonist heard many stories from the past, so he assumed that what was happening today was the day that people voluntarily signed up for the Shretu. He thought the stories in books were exaggerated, but watching this with his own eyes, it is clear that there were indeed many volunteers. It is hard for Jin to believe the amount of stupid people willing to risk their lives to save others. All this for in the end Ian to eliminate them all, leaving humanity to perish at the hands of the monsters. At that moment, tears roll. Jin sadly remembers the end of his mother. He doesn't understand why he's crying, since he doesn't have any emotion. This caught the attention of a boy who was passing by the place, and he asked if the protagonist was okay. The boy helps him get up while assuming that Jin is there to enter the Shretu. The protagonist thanks him for the help without looking at the boy's face. He just wipes away his tears, saying he doesn't know what happened. Jin didn't used to cry, so he felt he was losing control. The boy offers a handkerchief. Jin finally looks at him as he thanks. At that moment, the protagonist realizes that he is in front of Ian. Ian asks if it scared him. He was used to being called scary by people because of his appearance, so he assumed that Jin thought that too. Anyway, Ian makes it clear that it is not a bad person he should worry about. The protagonist was still paralyzed. He didn't expect to meet Ian right after going back to the past. While Jin thought about what he should do, Ian was embarrassed that he didn't get any answers, so he handed over the handkerchief and said goodbye, saying he needed to register. As Ian walked away, the protagonist thought it wasn't a good idea to finish him off there. It was a public place with a lot of people. It could be dangerous for him, so Jin's idea is to create an ambush in the future. At this moment, the protagonist follows in Ian's footsteps. He thinks that the traitor seemed scarier when he tried to stop him from returning to the past. In addition, Ian still does not have the scar. He probably won the mark during the eradication of the mute. The protagonist was surprised by the friendly way Ian speaks. At this moment, the number 180 is called to register. The secretary asks Ian to take the registration document and fill it out. The boy says he only needs one. The woman looks on with surprise. Ian doesn't understand what the problem is. The secretary explains that they don't accept a person. He needs to be accompanied. Ian thought it could take a while to fill out the membership. The woman apologizes and warns that the minimum number of members needed for the team is 2, and they have to fill out the form themselves. Ian replies that he will find a person and come back later. The woman tells him to come back before 6. The protagonist followed the conversation surreptitiously. He wondered if the group that Ian will form is the same one that helps him in the eradication. At this moment, Jin observes the boy asking to join some groups. The protagonist thought that Ian was a guy with plans, but he is only begging to be part of a team. The leader of the group accepts him as a member. Ian thanks him, but says he would like to be the captain of the team. The 3 volunteers look at him with disappointed faces. The protagonist felt ashamed. Ian promised that he would be a good captain. Suddenly, the leader of the group starts laughing and asks what nonsense he is talking about. The newcomer just asked to join his team, and now wants to be the captain. It is absurd for the team members. Ian apologizes for offending him. Suddenly, the leader pushes him while saying some insults. The protagonist is surprised by the scene and assumes that the idiot leader will have the same fate as his mother. But in fact, Ian just told the guy to forget about it. Jin doesn't understand why he didn't react. After all, Ian eliminated his mother just because she talked to him. The protagonist wonders what this lunatic standard is. He assumes that Ian is being friendly because he wants to achieve his goal of becoming an opera. Only team captains can be opera. And once the captain of a team is chosen, he cannot be changed. Ian continues to search for a group, but he is rejected every time. Suddenly, the protagonist has an idea. He thinks it is a good option to be Ian's teammate, so he can follow him more closely without arousing suspicion. The protagonist was ready to form a team with Ian, but someone else arrived first. A guy with red hair said he would be able to join his team. Jin looks with horror when he notices that this is the first member who joined Ian in the eradication. His name is Christopher Heinzel. Ian is happy to finally find a team. He recognizes Christopher's uniform and asks if he is from the totem. The boy answers in the affirmative. so Ian assumes that his specialty is magic. Christopher says that he is right, so the two introduce themselves. Ian makes it clear that he wants to be the captain. Christopher agrees, and the two shake hands. At this point, Ian says he has one more request. His goal is to become an opper, so he would like to stay with his teammates until the end as a family. Jin feels that he was not able to prevent the meeting with the first member of the group. Christopher laughs at Ian's request and says that he is dreaming big. It is difficult to become an opper, but he will support him. Jin feels that Ian is making a joke. First, he wants to form one group and says it will be his family, but in the future he eliminates all allies. It's ironic. Anyway, Christopher accepts Ian into the group and says that they need to hurry to fill out the form. The protagonist feels that he is now at a disadvantage. Even if he becomes their teammate, it won't be easy to murder Ian with someone else around. Jin wonders if he should give up. Good memories of his mother invade his mind, so he feels he can't give up. At this rate, it will take at least 2 years before the world falls into chaos. This means that someone needs to act. Maybe eliminating Christopher and Ian will solve all the problems. Later, the two got together and filled out the form. The secretary warned not to forget to meet at the training ground before the first day of March. Ian thanks him and leaves the Shretu headquarters. Christopher asks if he already has a place to stay. Ian says no. Then he is invited to go to a hotel. The protagonist follows the two. Christopher questions why he wants to become an opper. It's an incredible position, but it would be dangerous and difficult. Many people have passed away trying to become an opper. The current opper has overwhelming power. It's difficult for someone else to reach it. Ian replies that the reason behind his desire is not a big deal. He just wants money, honor, and practically everything that comes with the position. The truth is that he wants revenge. Christopher bursts into laughter hearing this. He says that if Ian wants revenge, then saving people is not the priority. Ian does not answer. Christopher says he likes the way he thinks. Besides, he found Ian handsome despite his scary eyes. The protagonist overheard the conversation and found it uninteresting. He accompanied the two to the hotel. The volunteers managed to rent the rooms to sleep. It was at that moment that the protagonist realized that he had no money to continue his goal of spying on the volunteers. But that's okay because Jin is used to sleeping outdoors. He lies on a wooden bed near the hotel when suddenly someone kicks him. The beggar says that this is his area, so he must leave. Jin realizes that people remain selfish as always. Now he has no other option but to sleep standing up. The next day, the protagonist wakes up on the floor. He assumes that he fell while sleeping. By the way, this place is actually better than he imagined. Even the floor is comfortable. Jin remembers that he and his mother used to wake up with bruises if they didn't put something on their backs. Now he decides to go back to the work of watching Anne. At this moment, the boy is focused on doing exercises. Suddenly, he is surprised by the unexpected appearance of Christopher. The two laugh and Christopher says that he does not think this training is efficient. Ian replies that it is the only thing he can do alone. The guy suggests that they train together so they can evaluate each other's strength. Ian agrees and says he will get the sword. However, Christopher says that it is better to train with his fists first. Ian disagrees because his job as a swordsman is to hold a sword. Suddenly, he realizes why Christopher does not need a weapon. At that moment, the wizard sends a sphere of fire towards Ian. The swordsman dodges. Christopher says that he needs to prepare because battles can happen unexpectedly. Ian then gets up and advances with a closed fist. But it doesn't hit Christopher because he prepared a magical barrier in advance. The confrontation is very fast, until Christopher manages to immobilize Ian with his magic. Apparently, victory seemed close, but the wizard saw something in Ian's body that scared him. Then he took out the magic and said they could stop. Ian asks if he's kidding. Christopher says he's hungry. So you'd better hurry. The two decide to go to a popular restaurant. Meanwhile, the protagonist was watching them carefully. He realized he couldn't handle the speed of reaction and these magical abilities. Defeat was certain. Maybe that's why his mother insisted that he convince Ian to quit. Jin tells himself that this is bad no matter how much he try. Your effort will be in vain. Jin gets stuck in his thoughts. On the other hand, Christopher tells the swordsman that it is better to shower before eating. Suddenly, he has a strange feeling and looks around. Night comes. Jin was still sitting on the floor. He spent all day thinking about what he should do. So at that moment, he had his decision. The boy clenches his fist and says he gave up. He gave up trying to prevent eradication because he felt that it was not worth wasting his energy on the impossible. It was better to have a peaceful life. His plan is to live comfortably for 2 years. Then just take a medicine to leave this world without feeling any pain. Suddenly, Jin's thoughts are interrupted by a sphere of fire that flies close to his face and hits the wall behind him. Christopher jokes that he doesn't have a good aim. He uses an intimidating voice to ask why Jin is following him and Ian since yesterday. At first, Christopher was planning to just ignore it, but now he is annoyed. He thinks Jin is a stalker. The protagonist doesn't know how to respond to the accusations. He was found right when he planned to leave. Suddenly, Christopher pulls the protagonist's hair and says it's good for him to talk before his mouth is torn off. The magician's killing intent increases and he questioned why the brat followed him constantly. Christopher keeps pulling Jin's hair. The protagonist sees no other option and drew his sword, then used the handle to hit Christopher's rib and escape. But it didn't go as planned. The wizard held his arm while asking why the stalker is watching them. Jin didn't answer. Then Christopher lost his patience and hit him with his fists. The protagonist tries to defend himself with his hands, but it's in vain. He spits red liquid and his face is full of bruises. Then he finally opens his mouth. The protagonist cries and asks the wizard to go. Jin was a good actor. Inside, he thought his performance was enough to convince anyone. But Christopher laughs and asks if the stalker thinks he's stupid to think he'd go free just by begging. The wizard puts his hands on the protagonist's neck and squeezes. He says that maybe the boy is used to kneeling pathetically like that. He must have done it other times, but it doesn't matter, because it still doesn't explain why Jin was following him. Christopher gives him one more chance to speak. The protagonist asks what will happen if he refuses. The wizard squeezes his neck harder and says that this will be the result. Jin remembers that it was written in the book that Ian's teammates were ruthless people. When he met Ian, he thought the book was wrong. After all, Ian is extremely friendly. But Christopher is exactly as the book described. At that moment, Jin says he hates the fact that he feels pain. He asked if Christopher could end him in a less painful way. The wizard was surprised by the request, because he didn't think the boy would accept being eliminated. Now he finds the weakness he wanted. Christopher takes a sword from hidden space and says it will make him suffer. Jin realizes that he is facing a lunatic. He has to get away from him as soon as possible. The protagonist then pushes the wizard. Christopher gets angry and decides to finish him off now, so he sends a blade towards Jin's eye. But the attack is blocked by Ian. The swordsman angrily asks what he is doing right. Christopher replies to Ian not to interfere. He didn't think the swordsman would be out so late at night. Ian replied that he was worried because Christopher took too long to come back. He thought that the companion had found some monster and came to check, but in fact he was hurting someone. Ian was against it and said that Christopher was an asshole. He asks how the protagonist is. Jin takes the opportunity to break this friendship and quickly replies that he is not well. Christopher reluctantly says that it is very difficult to control his temper. Ian decides that he does not want to be on the same team as the wizard if he acts thus. Christopher asks if the swordsman intends to expel him from the team. If this happens, Ian will also be expelled by omission and will not be able to become an opper. Christopher was right. He tried to convince Ian that he did nothing wrong. But the swordsman says that he has no justification to beat a civilian. The wizard soon warns that Jin was following them since yesterday. He only decided to hit the stalker because he is very sensitive to this kind of thing. Christopher admits that he feels that the brat wanted to murder them. The protagonist is surprised by the quick conclusion of the wizard. At that moment, Ian realizes that he had seen Ian before, when he went to fill out the form. He questions why the boy followed him. This time Jin has to tell a good story, or he can suffer the wrath of two people. The protagonist quickly has an idea, and says he only did it because he wanted to join Ian's team. He asks the swordsman to expel the wizard and put him in his place. An awkward silence hangs over the volunteers. Jin wonders if it wasn't a good offer. He understands that it was rash, because he can be seen as a beggar. While the volunteers are from a wealthy family, the protagonist thought he could complete his plan if he was on Ian's team, but forgot that Christopher was also on the team. He was described as the worst among all of Ian's teammates. Now Jin waits for the swordsman to accept him. At that moment, Ian stutters and says that maybe it doesn't make sense to have him on the team. The protagonist remembers that he also asked to join the teams of strangers. The man blushes and doesn't know what to answer. Christopher enters the conversation and says that Jin doesn't need them to become a Shretu, just register. The protagonist replies that he would like to be part of a good team, even with this appearance. He assures that he has a special look at the people. Ian says that the boy really had his eye on him, since he knows his name. In this case, he promises to think about his request. The protagonist soon asks to expel Christopher. The wizard gets angry at the request. Ian quickly gets in front of Jin to stop any attack. Christopher yells that the brat he is not a wizard, and is also physically weaker than him, so it makes no sense to be replaced. Ian tries to calm him down. The protagonist doesn't think being weak is a problem. Christopher is annoyed by these words and tells him to stop bragging. Jin explains that when he said he didn't know him, it was because he didn't want to be beaten. Christopher questions why he thinks he will be accepted in the group. The protagonist says that it's because that way Ian won't be disqualified. The swordsman interferes in the discussion and asks the two to calm down. Ian asks Jin's name, and after the answer says that from now on he wants to be careful when choosing his teammates. Then he asks if the newcomer has any special abilities. The protagonist thinks for a few seconds and says that he never forgets something he sees once. That's why he knows all the ways to respond to any monster. A silence hangs in the air. Christopher jokes that only someone weak would know that. He suggests that Jin use this intelligence to join another department. The protagonist understands that he will be at a disadvantage if he is compared to Christopher, but he doesn't know how he could stand out. Suddenly, an idea comes to his mind and Jin says that he can see the future. It is an advantage that no one else can have. Ian and Christopher open their mouths in shock. The swordsman thinks it is amazing. On the other hand, the wizard is sure that the boy is lying to be accepted into the group. The protagonist assures him that it is true and suggests saying something about the wizard's future. The guy immediately agrees, thinking that it will be some nonsense. But Jin replies that the future says that his name is Christian. The wizard hits the fist on the protagonist's face and pushes him back. Is that he is very impressed with the information because he had not yet introduced himself. At this point, the swordsman takes the opportunity to ask if he becomes an Oprah in the future. Jin knew about this spoiler and the answer is no. In fact, Ian will become one murderer and will be called a brutal criminal, trash, and much worse. Unfortunately, he can't tell that to Ian, so the protagonist lies, saying that he can't see the fate of the swordsman. Ian assumes that he will pass away soon. Jin says that he can see the passing of people, and he doesn't see that in Ian, so he doesn't have to worry. The protagonist also says that he only wanted to join the group because he was curious about Ian's future. For Jin, this was the most incredible performance of his life. But Christopher was skeptical and asked how many lies he told in that short time. The protagonist assures Ian that he can use these skills to increase his chances of becoming an opera. He also promises Christopher that he won't tell any lies from now on. Jin needs the support of the two and asks them to trust him. Christopher is the first to agree to accept him into the group. With one demand, Jin must stay with them the whole time. Christopher wanted to make sure that the stalker wouldn't run away. He did this without knowing that the protagonist really wanted to accompany them the whole time. After this conversation, Jin got a room. He went to take a shower when he realized that Christopher was there. Jin then warns that the wizard is in the wrong place. Christopher says he is there to ask a question. The protagonist asks where Ian is. The wizard replies that he is sleeping. Then he asks if the stalker can really see the future. Jin says yes and calls him by name. This annoys Christopher deeply. The protagonist doesn't understand why the guy always gets out of control. His mood suddenly changes. It turns out that Jin knew that Christopher was using a fake name. His real name was Christian. It was all written in the book, but the world would only find out later. Christopher asks why Jin thinks he allowed him to join the group. The protagonist replies that it's because the wizard needs him. Christopher feels offended hearing this and says that he actually wants to know why the boy was watching him. Jin is tired of this subject and just tells the guy to do whatever he wants. After all, he doesn't care about the wizard, and it's okay if the man wants to watch him. Christopher just asks the protagonist not to call him Christian again. Jin was curious to know why the guy didn't introduce himself with his real name. But if he asked, it would be clear that his ability to see the future was a lie. Then the protagonist asks if he can call him Chris. The wizard replies in an intimidating voice that he doesn't want him to shorten his name, so he must call him by the name of Christopher. He hands him a bag with bandages for Jin to put on his face. The wizard adds that he doesn't want him to appear in front of him with this face. The protagonist thanks him and the man leaves. Now Jin finally has a comfortable bed to sleep in. It will probably be the best night of his life. The next day, Ian comes personally to wake him up to go to the training ground. Jin gets up and says that it will be quick, but the swordsman reassures him that they still have an hour. Later, the three of them walk together towards the training ground. Ian was the most excited. They joined a crowd of people. All eyes were directed to an information board. Ian confirms with the protagonist if what is written is true. Jin replies that yes. Christopher is still skeptical about his abilities, but he thinks the boy knows too much for someone who is just an information agent anyway. That day, the protagonist managed to fill out his form and be part of Ian's team. At that moment, they received the inconvenient presence of the blonde boy who felt offended by Ian wanting to be the captain. He asks if the idiot swordsman got members for his group. Christopher asks if Ian knows these people. The swordsman seems surprised by the newcomers and says he has never seen them. The blonde leader gets so angry and feels slighted that he tries to hit him with a punch. The protagonist quickly blocks the attack with a kick. The leader falls to the ground in pain. Christopher and Ian are impressed. Jin warns that filling in the form is not all. Now they need to hurry to the physical exam. The trio quickly leaves, leaving the leader inconvenient behind. Minutes later, the training camp guide named Yang Lu asks if they are going to the third training camp. After hearing an affirmative answer, he asks the group to get into the car. Ian sits between the two volunteers and tells Jin that it was lucky for them to go to the training camp together. The protagonist agrees. Ian takes the moment to tell Christopher that it's not too late to apologize to Jin. The wizard says there's no reason to do that, but Ian remembers that Christopher hit the boy earlier. The protagonist says he doesn't have to do it if he doesn't want to. He also doesn't want to accept his apology. Christopher thinks that Jin woke up in a bad mood. At that moment, the protagonist tells Ian that he has something he forgot to tell him. The guide ends up not hearing Jin speak and interrupts him. He says that they have already arrived at the destination, so everyone gets out of the car. The guide says that they must go to the dormitory. The three obey and enter the room. To be honest, it's better than they expected. It seems that each team has its own room. Christopher hopes that his two colleagues won't snore in their sleep, or he will have to turn up their noses. Suddenly, they are interrupted by a voice, which orders everyone to leave the room. At this moment, three captains are in the hallway. A woman in uniform tells the idiot not to stand still and close the door. Ian apologizes and obeys. He thinks the instructor is very rude. The other captains think the same thing. The instructor hands them a box and warns them that each team captain must deliver the uniforms to all members of his team and gather outside the building. Ian informs the boys what the woman just said. Suddenly she yells for everyone to hurry. The captains and members get dressed quickly. The instructor ordered those who had already finished their uniforms to form a line in front of the door. After everyone gathered, she introduced herself as Ruri-hyu, the instructor who will be in charge of Group 1 of Training Camp 3. She makes it clear that she doesn't like slow and irresponsible things. Next time they should be faster. Ruri-hyu explains that the squads are divided by numbers. From the first to the third, the team leader must answer immediately if questioned. Finally, the instructor says that she can ask if there is any doubt, but she prefers that they look for the answer alone. After the information, the volunteers are advised to return to the room. Everyone obeys. Ian lies on the floor after feeling intimidated by the instructor. His legs were staggering. At that moment, a woman invades their room and introduces herself as the captain of the neighboring group. His squad is the second. Jin finds the familiar woman. Suddenly, she runs and brings the leader of the third squad. It seems that the guy is shy. The captain of the second team introduces herself as Jad Martin and says that it is a pleasure to meet everyone. Her skill is magic. She displays some flame techniques and says that she can also use flight magic for a short period, but it's not so cool. Ian holds the sword and says that he can't show his martial arts before the exam because he doesn't want to destroy anything. The leader of the third squad says that he can't show off his techniques either. At that moment, Christopher shows his telekinesis magic to everyone. Jad is delighted and the two exchange compliments. The protagonist is shy because he has nothing to show. Jad puts his hand around his neck and asks if he won't perform. She assumes that the boy doesn't want to show the skills too. Suddenly, Jin pushes her and asks why she is demanding so much from her limbs. An awkward silence hangs in the air. Jad apologizes, but Ian scolds the protagonist for speaking so rudely. Honestly, Jin thought it would be okay to talk like that, but everyone was looking at him with surprise. A member of Jad's team told her to go back to the dormitory. The girl says goodbye to Ian and leaves. The third squad does the same. Christopher is happy with what happened and says that Jin is worse than him in terms of socializing with other people under pressure. The wizard suggests having more patience because they will be his neighbors from now on. The protagonist apologizes for what happened. Christopher just asks him to make an effort. Ian suggests that they rest. At this point, Jin warns that he doesn't feel most emotions. Maybe his group doesn't believe it, but that's why he has a lot of difficulty relating to other people. Jin remains with his head down, embarrassed. Ian asks if it's congenital. The protagonist replies no. It turns out that he had an accident when he was little. Jin shows the scar. Christopher, I think it's strange because he remembers the boy crying when he was beaten. Jin says he doesn't feel emotions, but he knows what he should feel in a moment of despair. The wizard then questions if he really doesn't mind receiving an apology. The protagonist answers in the affirmative, so the man feels relieved because he really doesn't want to do that. The protagonist says that the only thing he seeks now is to earn a lot of money and live comfortably without exercising. He knows that an ordinary person would be happy with that. The volunteers agree. Christopher says that it is good that he has a good memory to know what is the emotion he should feel. The protagonist says he learned this in his childhood. Usually his mother taught him that way. Ian says that the boy can ask him for help if he wants, as he is willing to help him in the best way possible. Christopher says he will also help him, and soon asks Jin to get him some water. This is his practical method of socialization. Ian scolds him for this request, but the protagonist replies that he will do it because he is also thirsty. The swordsman asks if the boy is okay with this, and receives a positive answer. Jin leaves the dormitory and overhears a conversation in the lobby of the building. Jad's group refers to him as brat without manners. They are sure that the protagonist cannot adapt to military training. Jad says he doesn't care about the way he was treated. At this point, his friend says that the ugliest guy in the group also has a bad personality. Jin heard the offense in silence. He remembers hearing Jad's name in the books. Later, she will go up to level 3 and perform a lot like Midra, a great sorceress. The protagonist did not expect to be offended by Midra's heroine. He decides to solve it. So Jin passes by the three and goes towards the water. The volunteers are surprised by the boy's unexpected appearance because they were talking bad about him just now. The protagonist just fills 3 glasses of water and leaves without saying anything. He goes back to the room and his friends wait for him. Ian and Christopher thought about greeting Jad again, but in the end they didn't. A few days later, the rest period ended and the serious training began. Hayu calls Jad's attention because she is going through difficulties. The instructor says to stretch her legs correctly and stand up. The girl obeys. Sometime later, the training ends. Christopher is curious to know if the protagonist knows anything about the instructor's future. Jin touches forehead as if looking to the future at that moment. Then he warns that Ryu's hand-to-hand combat skills are her strong point. She prioritizes following the rules. He even heard that she is a bit old-fashioned. Christopher says that it is no wonder that she keeps teaching them how to use Tanaka. Anyway, he thinks the protagonist can do well if he uses this skill in the exam. Jin hadn't thought so because he never took any tests. Christopher changes the subject and asks if they don't think it's strange that Jad can't do some exercises. The scene changes to later. Hayu calls the attention of the groups. The instructor shouts, asking if it makes sense for them to be scolded because of some people. She thinks that everyone should learn to live as a family if the members are important. Suddenly a voice asks why she is screaming, and if the students are not listening. The woman looks back in surprise and finds a fellow instructor. Hayu calls him by the name of Sunman and asks under what pretext he came here. The members look curiously at the newcomer. At that moment, the man asks why they are not paying attention to the woman's instructions. So, with an intimidating voice, he asks the limbs to rest their arms. The order is quickly obeyed. The man gives some instructions for movements. Someone calls Sun's attention. He wonders if the captain of the first team is not paying attention. The man decides to test the other captains and tells Jad to do the same move. But she has difficulty. Sun approaches and asks if she could be the bad thing who doesn't listen to Hai's orders. Suddenly, he orders everyone to do the shoulder-to-shoulder training. Everyone is forced to do Sun's training, which is more work than instructor Hayu's training. Jin knows that the man is doing it just for discipline, but he doesn't understand why no one is refusing to do the heavy training. Even an instructor who looks weaker than him is doing what he wants. So the protagonist wonders why everyone is putting up with it. Hai's disciplinary method was already a little rude, but understandable for an instructor. The newcomer looks scary and doesn't care about their physical condition. Even so, everyone obeys. At that moment, the protagonist gets up, while all the other members continue to do the training. The man looks at him and asks what the boy is doing alone standing. Jin says that Sun is not even his assigned instructor, so he has no reason to follow his instructions. The members open their mouths in shock. Suddenly, Sun bursts into laughter and asks his co-worker if she doesn't think this guy is funny. The instructor just asks him to stop and leave the place. After all, he went there to do it after leaving Squad 3 somewhere. Sun replies that he left the captain taking care of everything. Anyway, now he's busier taking care of the brat. The guy tries to face the protagonist, but Jin just asks why he doesn't stop causing trouble. Ian touches the protagonist, as if asking him to be quiet and avoid the instructor. Jin noticed the cold sweat running down his colleague's temples. Ian also seems to be having a lot of difficulty, so the protagonist says that he will not follow everything the man says just because he entered here. At that moment, the boy receives a kick in the leg and falls to the ground. Christopher scolds him. The kick didn't hurt at all, but the protagonist still didn't understand why no one was reacting. The instructor asks the guy with red hair to calm down. Then he approaches the protagonist and orders him to get up. Jin complies with the order. Ian quickly interferes, saying that he can take care of him. Sun assumes that the swordsman is Jin's captain and says that this place is not a school for him to have who takes care of someone. The instructor calls attention again and scolds the protagonist, but he feels useless when he realizes that Jin doesn't lower his eyes. The protagonist's arrogant look makes the man out of his mind. He simply loses control, starts screaming like crazy. The members just watch the scene. Ian gives a subtle smile, thinking that this happened as a side effect of that lack of emotion. Christopher noticed that Jin managed to get rid of the inconvenience with just one look. Hayu calls everyone's attention and orders them to return to their positions. A few hours later, the training came to an end and the protagonist was invited to talk to the instructor. Hayu waited for him in the meeting room. He enters and asks why he was called. The woman replies that she inevitably needs to talk about the incident that happened in Shretu. She says that her attitude in today's training was not good. Then he asks Jin to reflect on it, but he seems to reluctantly. Hayu says that regardless of his opinion, when someone stronger than him gives instructions, it means that he should listen to that person. Jin says that he will do it if the man is established as captain. He doesn't think he has to endure this just because Sun has a higher rank. The protagonist tells himself that if the instructor was stronger than him, would have no choice but to surrender. But there is no reason for him to follow the guidelines of a weaker person. Hayu says that this veteran named Sum learned the basics in Shretu and completed his career in a fight against monsters. What is needed is not a strong person. The reason why the words of the veterans are absolute is that the veteran is the most experienced in the field when he is placed in a real fight. Hayu adds that Jin will only be able to grow when he recognizes their value. So, Ignoring the words of a veteran is not a simple problem of stubbornness, it is a problem that can result in death. The protagonist replies that he understands what she means. But I don't think it corresponds to the words of the instructor. After all, the instructions given in the field and the instructions given now are clearly different. ᴄᴏᴘᴘύʀɪឡᴜ admits that he is right. Even so, the protagonist needs to follow her orders, or the environment will be uncomfortable. She encourages Jin to dedicate himself to training and rise to a level that no other veteran has ever reached. He will not have to obey other people if he stays at the top of the hierarchy. The protagonist replies that he understands. At that moment, Ian and Christopher wait for him in the hallway. As soon as Jin leaves the room, Christopher pushes him against the wall and scolds him for getting into trouble. He says that if the boy acts of his own will, he will not just get a scolding. Ian asks the wizard to calm down. Suddenly, a handcuff appears in Jin's hands. Christopher looks scared and sees a wizard. The newcomer introduces himself as Jang. The atmosphere becomes tense, and the man apologizes for interrupting Christopher's lecture. But he needs to take the intern Jin arrested, since he insulted a veteran. The protagonist seemed very surprised by the accusation. He was sentenced to 10 days in prison. Sometime later, Jin was in a cell. He lay on the floor and realized that it would be more uncomfortable than he thought. 2 days later, Ian went to check on his friend was fine. Visibly, the protagonist was in trouble. Lying on the floor was very uncomfortable. He wants to go back to the dorm as soon as possible, but he still has to stay 8 days in that place. Meanwhile, in the dormitory, the captain of Squad 2 talks to her members. She comments that the protagonist was imprisoned in an underground prison. Jad feels sorry for the member of Squad 1. At that moment, Ian passes by her. The girl soon asks why he seems so rushed. The swordsman replies that he went to check on his friend and realized that it was much worse than he thought. Then he goes to request that his punishment be reduced. Jad replies that he will help him do that. She says that she feels a little guilty. Everyone had difficulty because she was very clumsy during training, resulting in Jin's arrest because he wanted to help her. Ian smiles and touches her hand. He then says that he will count on your help. Jad says goodbye to the members, saying that he will be back soon. A few hours later, the protagonist receives a visit in his cell. The policeman warns him that he is released, but must go to the instructor's room first. Jin is relieved to get out of jail. He immediately arrives at the instructor's room, and the woman says that he should thank his roommate. The protagonist is surprised. ᴄᴏᴘᴘύʀɪឡᴜ said that his team leader and the leader of Squad 2 went around requesting a favorable deal for Jin. She is happy that he has good team members supporting him. The protagonist was most surprised to be helped by Jad. He thought the girl hated him. A few minutes later, Jin finally returns to the dormitory. He is greeted by Ian and Jad. The protagonist bows, thanking the two for helping, but the volunteers say he doesn't need to thank them. Jad hands them a bottle of drink. She remembers that she asked Christopher what drink the protagonist liked, but the wizard didn't know and suggested the drink flavored with pine needles. She decided to follow his advice, so she says that she understands if the protagonist doesn't like it. Jad also apologizes for what he said about him earlier. She says that she knows that the boy heard everything when he went to get water. Ian is curious to know what Jad said, but Jin says it was no big deal. Jad continues to give some explanations. On the other hand, the protagonist takes the opportunity to drink all the drink. He remembers how his animosity started with this girl, so he assumes it was better that way. Otherwise, she could have been arrested along with him. Jin says he can forget about all his problems. The girl runs and then jumps into his arms. She thanks the protagonist for forgiving her. Jin tells the girl to move away a little. Jad takes the opportunity to call Ian for the hug as well. After the protagonist left the prison, he did the training at night to make up for the lack of time. Instructor ᴄᴏᴘᴘύʀɪឡᴜ taught him by herself. Ian watched everything carefully because he didn't want the protagonist to feel alone. Now Jin doesn't know how to feel about it. At the end of the night, he returned to the dormitory with Ian. Christopher notices by the appearance that his companion was not well. Jin said that from now on he will follow any rule. The fatigue of training at night and in the morning does not pay. Christopher uses magic to put the two volunteers in their proper beds. He did it to help them. The next day, Jin wakes up and gets out of bed. He sees Ian focused on a newspaper. The mood seems a bit heavy, and the protagonist immediately remembers that the swordsman will become an assassin in the future. The last few days made him forget that. Jin asks what he is doing, and Ian replies that he is just reading the newspaper. It's some information about Beam. The swordsman confesses that he is jealous of him. The protagonist is surprised. So Ian tries to improve the atmosphere by saying that he is jealous because his goal is to be like Beam. Jin can only think that Ian will be so invincible in the future that he will eliminate Beam himself. A while later, the training of the first season came to an end. The members got a short 2-day vacation. Ian started the day reading the book Dependent Spirit. Christopher says that this is the most recent and asks how the guy did it. The swordsman replied that he won it from a friend. Christopher asks to borrow it. The protagonist soon joins the conversation and asks what the volume of the book is. Ian says that this is for. Jin says that he knows the whole story because he has read everything. The swordsman asks surprised if he did it thanks to his ability to see the future. The protagonist replies yes and adds that the book ends in volume 6. Ian asks him to tell him what happens in the other 2 books. Jin asks if his friend is sure he wants to know the ending in advance. It's just that it ended in a strange way. Christopher yells at him not to say any spoilers. Ian also gives up on knowing anything about the book. This decision lasted a few hours, because then the protagonist was tormented by the 2 friends. They really wanted to know the end of the story and couldn't stand to read 2 books to find out. It seems that the protagonist aroused a lot of curiosity by saying that the book ended in a strange way. Jin touches his forehead, as he always does when he needs to lie that he is reading the future. Then he informs the volunteers that in the end the protagonist, who has dedicated his entire life to pursuing the goal, ends up giving up everything. Even in his life, Christopher found this decision too extreme. On the other hand, Ian was curious to know how the audience reacted. The protagonist confesses that he didn't understand when he read volume 6. Everyone thought it was too extreme an attitude for someone who was clinging strongly to his goal. Christopher asks what the next work of the writer of the book will be, Mizira Arsh. The protagonist can't reveal because he knows that he will be eliminated during the eradication of Mudo, so he won't have time to do the next work. Jin lies, saying that the author will stop to write. Ian seems curious. The protagonist replies that it's because he passes away. Everyone is surprised. Jin says that this will happen in 2 or 3 years. Maybe he was devoured by a monster. Christopher decides that he needs to visit the author before that happens. Ian says that it's very good to have someone like Jin on the team. Now they can play an important role saving people. The swordsman said this without knowing that he will be responsible for the end of thousands of people. Christopher agrees that it is good to have Jin on the team, then says that the next time he gets up to no good, he will be sent to the hospital instead of jail. Ian says that Christopher's threats are his way of showing concern. Even the wizard often asked every day if it was close to the protagonist returning when he was imprisoned. Ian feels very happy for the members he got. The protagonist says he has to thank for being accepted into the team. Christopher seems not to like the atmosphere of friendship and complains. After 2 days, the intensive training for the specialization of the members is about to begin. The instructor orders everyone to gather in the training room with their numbered tickets distributed. The hand-to-hand combat experts are gathered in the same room. The mages are with mages. The healers are also grouped together. The protagonist received the same training with Ian. Only Christopher received separate training for being the only wizard on the team. Now he was in the building with several different wizards. Christopher thought it would be best not to stand out. At this moment, Jad calls for him. The two sit together in the bleachers and talk about the holidays. Jad decides to introduce Christopher to a colleague. At this moment, a strange-looking wizard introduces himself as Lin Kuro. Christopher says it's a pleasure to meet him. They both shake hands and Christopher curses the man mentally for being sweaty. The scene changes to Ian and Jin's training. Instructor Ruri-Hayu remains in charge. She gives some guidance while the members look at it wholeheartedly. At that moment, Ruri-Hayu tells intern 113 to come forward and demonstrate what he understood. The protagonist stands up and remembers the conversation he had with the woman. Ruri-Hayu said that instead of annoying them and making them angry, Jin should treat all veterans the same way. He was ready to do that and walked over to the instructor. Ruri-Hayu gave the order to use Mentry as soon as possible. Jin manages to carry out the order for a few seconds. He loses his balance and sits on the floor. The instructor explains that it is normal for this to happen when you use 80% of your Mentry. When the person is exhausted and tries to use force, his body will derail. Even if he tries to fight, it will be a great waste. The instructor thanks Jin for the hard work and tells him to go back to his place. She explains to everyone that the exercise is to know how long your body can withstand. It will be troublesome if you simply fail in front of a monster. That's why the goal of this training is to recognize your own limitations. Now Ruri-Hayu releases a duo to train. The hand-to-hand combat between the members begins. Ian does well and defeats the opponent, but he almost causes an incident. The girl was fine because he held her. Ruri-Hayu announces the end of the training and invites the next pair. She tells the trainee 425 to choose someone to train. The man invites the protagonist. Jin accepts without any problems. The challenger thought it would be easy to beat the protagonist because he used all his Mentry during the demonstration until he derailed. The average time for complete recovery of the Mentry is 30 minutes. Then the opponent felt confident, but it didn't last long. Jin knocked him out with a kick to the face. Then Ruri-Hayu called the next contestants. At the same moment, Christopher performed his practical test with the magic team. He passed without problems while Jad cheered for him. At that moment, the strange guy arrives to talk to Christopher. He thinks that the level of Shretu is not high. Christopher assumed that he had passed, since he said that, but in fact Lin hadn't taken the test yet. He tried to shake hands with the magician, But Christopher refused, saying that he doesn't touch men he's touched once. He lies when he says that allergy symptoms start to appear quickly. It's something in the family that he can't avoid. Lin says that there is nothing like this in his family. He asks if Christopher knows his family. The wizard says no and asks if the Lin family is a famous family. The strange guy replies that it is difficult to find someone who did not know about the Lin family in the wizarding world. He says that maybe it is because Christopher is a wandering gypsy who has not learned anything. Lin realizes that she made a mistake in saying this. When she notices the magician's angry face, he apologizes for it. At that moment, his number is called for the test. The guy takes the opportunity to stay away. A friend of Christopher's laughs at the situation he just went through. He also mocks the allergy that the friend invented. Lin auditions. Christopher thinks the guy was terrible, but he passes anyway. The instructor congratulates his performance. Christopher is surprised. Later, the members return to the dormitory. Christopher arrives in the room clearly angry. Ian asks if something happened. The wizard asks if he knows Lin. He is a wizard who has the perfect face to hit. Ian asks what the boy did to make Christopher angry. While the two were talking, the protagonist seemed to remember Lin's name, but only the name was familiar. Nothing came to his mind, so he tries to get more information. Christopher says that there is something strange with Lin. Even if his skills are not so good, he continues to act proudly. Christopher does not remember meeting the famous family that Lin talks about. The protagonist assumes that this wizard named Lin is an idiot. After all, no one could brag about the family in front of Christopher, who had a perfect noble family. Jin soon remembers that Christian is using the alias Christopher, so maybe that's why. The protagonist advises his friend not to worry about this guy because he must not be special. Christopher doesn't know if he can believe that. The third instructor certainly helped him a lot. At this point, Jin gives an important piece of information. He says that the third instructor is a very greedy person. That's why he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The protagonist assumes that the third instructor may be taking bribes from Lin. Christopher is surprised and says he didn't know that the man had already been arrested. Ian questions if this third instructor is not the same guy who sent Lin to prison. The protagonist replies that it was himself. His first name is Caleb, but Ruryu calls him son. Christopher is thoughtful about the word bribe. The next day, the training continues. Jin fights a young man with red hair. Despite the opponent having more muscles, his movements are slow, so the protagonist has the advantage. He defeats his rival in a few minutes. Later, some information appears on the bulletin board. The students gather to see the standings. Ian got 100 points, while the protagonist got 93. Suddenly, volunteer 425 catches his attention. The intern complains to Jin that he doesn't take it easy on the fight. The man says that all the brat had to do was win. Then he questions why he wants to lower another team's score like that. Ian asks what's going on. The protagonist tells 425 that he didn't do it on purpose and also didn't know he would be hit. The intern holds Jin by the collar. Ian quickly intervenes and says that he is the leader of the protagonist's group, then apologizes for him. If something happened, volunteer 425 angrily tells the captain to keep his limb out of trouble before the weather gets worse. A girl demands that they disperse. Ian says they need a shower. The protagonist follows the captain silently, but on the way, Ian changes his mind and says that it is better to go back to the dorm first. Jin thinks it's strange, but he assumes it's because Ian is angry. He acted like that when the protagonist caused problems. Now Jin fears that he is getting in the way too much. If this happens, Ian may think it is better to put an end to him. The protagonist understands that he needs to be careful from now on. Later, the protagonist finishes the shower. Sun was in the building. He soon asks Jin to buy him a pack of cigarettes, but the protagonist says it's raining. The third instructor replies that he can't go because it's raining. Jin had no obligation to fulfill Sun's request, but he may face new problems if he refuses. At that moment, Sun touches his shoulder and in an intimidating voice asks if Jin is listening. The protagonist replies that he is going to buy the cigarette, but needs the money. Sun just asks to put the bill in his name. A few minutes later, Jin left the dormitory and went in search of a store on the outskirts of Shretu. A torrential rain was falling. The boy used an ordinary umbrella and a hood to protect himself. At the same moment, Anne returned to the dormitory and looked for Jin, but Christopher informed him that he was not there. Ian takes the opportunity to ask if anything happened during the training. The mage admits that yes. He thinks he is being harmed on purpose by the third instructor. Ian says that just some is not enough to lower his grade. After all, instructors 3 and 4 are responsible for the magic class. Christopher says that Ian is right, but even so, she still has a low score. Christopher says that there is no reason for him to have a low grade because the training is easy. Ian assumes that this has to do with the fact that the third instructor does not like Jin. Christopher agrees and says that if that child does something out of the ordinary again, Ian must correct his behavior. The swordsman prefers not to say the new problem that the protagonist caused today. Suddenly, they are surprised by Jin's appearance. So they ask where he was. The protagonist replied that he went on a mission to the instructor. Ian questions if he did well. Jin feels offended by the question because he thinks the boys don't take him seriously. Christopher says that he imagines him refusing to follow the instructor's orders. The wizard advises the boy to obey his superiors, even if he doesn't agree. The protagonist realizes that the atmosphere between the two is not so pleasant. He knows he has a share of blame for this, so he promises himself that tomorrow he won't cause any problems. The next day, Jin faces a woman. This time he fights with moderation and ends up getting beaten. The girl keeps hitting. After the defeat, the protagonist mentally says that he knows the reason why his score was lower than Ian's. It turns out that he was bad at controlling his strength. Ian watches his friend's defeat with sadness. At first, Jin thought that the injured were going to the infirmary. Then he was surprised when a healer touched his ribs. He didn't expect that he would be subjected to an experiment as a practice for healing magicians. The girl apologized for putting his ribs wrong. Jin mentally begged for a real doctor to help him. Later, the protagonist returned to the dorm. The first thing he asks is how was his score. Ian says that Jin won 63 points. It seems that he dropped in the ranking. The protagonist warns that he decided to relax in today's training because yesterday annoyed a lot of people. So he ended up with some broken bones. Ian gets angry when he realizes that Jin chose to be beaten just to not annoy people. The protagonist replies that he thought the swordsman would like him to get along with the other members. Ian says that he really would be if that happened, but he wouldn't want Jin to get hurt. The two talk for some time and tell what happened to Christopher. The wizard is completely annoyed. It turns out that he's not getting good grades either. Ian tries to calm his friends, but Christopher says he hates Lin and Sun's friendship. Originally, he hated Lin for her history of talking nonsense, but the relationship between bribes and people is so rich that he wants to beat them up. Christopher hates that Lin's score is bigger than his. In the end, Lin is nothing without money. At this moment, the protagonist says that soon Jad will be promoted to level 3 and will become quite famous. Ian and Christopher open their mouths in shock. Jin doesn't understand why they reacted like this. Christopher soon asks how this is possible if Jad is a weak mage. The protagonist doesn't think this is true, but the wizard says that Jad is weaker than Lin. He made her explode at least once. Ian also thinks she's not strong, but he's happy to know that Jad will be strong one day. The protagonist is thoughtful. He didn't think everyone had this vision of Jad. Probably she trusted her team members until she woke up. Christopher jokingly asks if it's not better to get rid of Jad now, while she's still weak. Ian yells at the boy not to make this kind of joke with a friend, but Christopher asks if the swordsman isn't afraid that these people get in his way. After all, he wants to become an opera. A silence hangs over them. Jin says that Ian doesn't need to worry because Jad is no match for him. Suddenly, Christopher interrupts him, saying that he is curious to know if the protagonist knows his own future. Jin replies that he doesn't. Ian remembers that the boy said he couldn't see his future either. The protagonist is starting to have problems with the curiosity of his friends. To avoid difficult questions in the future, he decides to be clear with words. Jin replies that he does not see Ian's future because it is a special case. There are no exact patterns. Suddenly, Christopher covers his mouth with his hand. At that moment, Jad opens the door to their room accompanied by Lin. They both stare at each other for a few seconds in silence. Christopher hopes the newcomers haven't heard anything. He asks angrily why they broke into his room. Lin starts shaking. Jad immediately asks Christopher to calm down. She brought Lin because he has something to tell before Jad apologizes for coming in without knocking. The girl thought it was okay because the door was a little open. Christopher just asks Lin to be direct. The wizard says he was harsh the last time they talked, but he didn't have a chance to apologize, so he came here to apologize. Ian whispers to Jad asking what Lin said to make Christopher angry. The girl replies that he doesn't know. In this case, Ian kicks the two out, saying he's tired. The door closes and the protagonist answers if there is really a need to hide his abilities. Christopher says that he thought Jin would trust reason since he doesn't feel emotions, but it seems that he is dumb. The wizard explains that people will be greedy when they know his ability. Jad would be the first to run to him out of curiosity. It can get worse if the third instructor knows. Ian agrees with Christopher and advises him to hide this ability, mainly because Jin doesn't have the ability to protect himself. The protagonist feels offended, but Christopher says that this is true. He still can't protect himself against strong people. The wizard checks some points on Jin's body to make sure he doesn't have any problems. Ian says that the protagonist fights well, despite the opposing team always complaining. Christopher asks what happened. The swordsman says that whenever Jin fought, he focused on quickly neutralizing his opponents. As a result, the rival always had a much lower score. Christopher asks if he is saying that some idiot is asking Jin to take it easy just because of the score. The right thing would be for the opponent to concentrate and win the fight, so he wouldn't get a low score. Christopher asks who is demanding this from Jin. Ian says that his name is Aku. Maybe Christopher doesn't know him. Ian explains that he called the attention of 425 after he scolded Jin. It turns out that Aku was upset with the low points. Then the swordsman said that it was not wrong for his team members to work hard in training and finish with good classifications. Aku replies that the points should be individual, but it seems that Ian combines to win with another person. The swordsman replied it was just the purpose of the stable mentry's training. Aku re-saying that Anne seems to have a good idea of the training system. All training centers are competitors. That means you can be elected to enter under the leadership of a level 6 instructor based on performance. If you don't have enough points, it will be any servant. In the end, everyone wants good grades to get into the dream job. Ian understands what Aku is trying to say. He won't be able to get a big score depending on the generosity of the opponent. This kind of behavior conflicts with the ideology of meritocracy. Aku admits that he hadn't thought that way. It looks really bad, but he doesn't feel guilty. Suddenly, Ian pushes the man's head down and says in an intimidating voice that he must never touch his companion again, or else things will get problematic, and he doesn't want to go to Nansuak. Aku trembles hearing this. Apparently, it was something personal of life was man. At the current moment, Ian thinks he may have overreacted. He sums up this story by saying that he just asked 425 not to scold Jin again. Christopher remembers a case where a weak guy got 90 points because they took care of each other. It would be a shame if his rating dropped, because someone like Aku begged him not to fight. The protagonist is thoughtful, because he remembers that Ian disappeared after he caused this problem. Jin thought that the swordsman planned to expel him. Now it is clear that Ian had gone to solve the situation. Christopher says that Aku may be wrong, but maybe it's a problem if Jin gets hurt so much just because he can't control his strength at the time of the fight. Ian says that his last grade was 93. Christopher says that it is better than his. He orders that from now on the protagonist stop doing unnecessary things and practice his strength control. He needs to get stronger and match the members of the group. The protagonist widened his eyes in surprise at this counsel. Over the next few days, Christopher began to help the protagonist practice his strength control. He was beaten a few times, then focused on getting the training right. Maybe it's because he didn't want to get hit. Christopher praised his learning ability. Jin's next fight was with the same girl he was defeated. She says that she knows that he doesn't attack her with all his might. Jin asks how she noticed. The woman bursts out laughing. The next moment she tries to make a sneak attack. But the protagonist was ready to use his teachings. Christopher taught that instead of using force unconditionally, it is better to look for an opening and then inflict it by giving it appropriately. At that moment, the girl receives a blow to the stomach. Then the protagonist finishes with a squeeze on the neck. The instructor announces the end of the session and thanks Jin for his hard work. Ian is happy for his friend's performance. Before leaving the arena, the protagonist tells the opponent that her grade may be lower, but she shouldn't be mad because she did very well today. She laughs, saying that she wouldn't be mad at him just because she was weak. The girl adds that she will win next time. Ian notices a romantic mood and whispers to the protagonist to help the girl up. Jin quickly does so. The woman says she heard what her captain said. After a few hours, Ian and Jin are eager to see the scores. The protagonist is praised because today he fought very well. Ian is sure that today they got the best grades. At that moment, the two see something horrible on the bulletin board. Ian received the worst grade. He is about to complain when Rurihayu appears. She says to follow her. Ian obeys and the protagonist stands outside the room. He doesn't understand how the captain got such a bad grade. Ian and Christopher graduated from the training center in the top 1%, so now he doesn't understand where the mistake is. At that moment, another person appears to tell Jin that he must go to Instructor 4's office. The scene changes to a few minutes later. Jin waits for the instructor to stop punishing Ian. Then it's his turn to enter the office. At that moment, he finds Rurihayu next to the instructor. It turns out that Ian was being accused of threatening a trainee of the 4th instructor. The swordsman tried to explain that he only spoke to Aku because he was the first to touch a member of his team. In addition, Aku encouraged them to manipulate the scoreboards. The 4th instructor yells that Ian has already talked too much. Now he wants to hear Jin. But before the instructor yells that his team leader is beating up other people, and then just makes excuses, so he wants to hear something that makes sense. The protagonist knows that Ian got involved in this problem because of him, so he can't let things end that way. At this point, Jin says that he and Ian are the victims. If the protagonist could point out his mistake, it would be that he did not foresee that Aku would break the instructors for a matter as trivial as this. Anyway, Jin decides to explain everything that happened between him and trainee 425 so far. Everyone listens to the story in silence, but their faces seem surprised. After all, Aku wanted to manipulate the final score. In addition, the protagonist adds that Aku lost control when he scolded him. Thanks to Ian, nothing happened, so he can't accept that his friend is punished. The 4th instructor found the story very well told. It even looks like a book. He asks if Jin is sure he didn't make it all up. Ian defends his friend by saying that Jim has a great memory. Thanks to this explanation, intern 425 was called too. He was not satisfied at all. This time Ruri-Hayu takes the lead in the situation and demands that AQ explain the situation. Intern 425 stutters when saying that Ian suddenly called him and threatened him, so he resisted and used his torso instead of his head. AQ adds that Ian grabbed his head so hard that he thought he would be crushed, so it's the least that the captain receives punishment. The protagonist asks if AQ doesn't also think he should be punished. After all, he was the first to make threats. AQ asks the instructors not to listen to the aggressors, but Jin continues to say that there is no physical proof, a consistent and specific testimony to use as evidence. The protagonist questions if AQ is not ashamed of himself. A man named Soldier goes to his instructor and complains just because his head was grabbed, it looks like a child's attitude. These words make AQ lose control, and he grabs Jin by the collar. Ian asks in an intimidating voice if trainee 425 has forgotten what he said earlier. At this moment, the fourth instructor yells at them to stop. He accuses the protagonist of not respecting his office and doing whatever he wants, adding that his attitude has been really annoying for a while now. Then he tells Ian that what the captain did is not a serious crime, but his training will end with a no-show notice. Ian is in shock. Rurio defends his students, saying that a no-show notice will be horrible. Ian's grade would drop by half. The instructor replies that this is the minimum. It is a normal punishment next to what he did to a colleague. Ruri-Hayu remembers that Ian also received threats from intern 425. In this case, AQ should receive the same treatment. The instructor asks if she is joking. Ruri-Hayu stands her ground and says that the punishment for her trainee is unfair, so she will not accept it. The fourth instructor is about to scream when Sun tells him to calm down. The third instructor reminds him that Ruri-Hayu strictly follows the rules, so she is not wrong to defend her trainee. At that moment, Ian interrupts them. He does not think a notice of no-show is fair when in fact he has successfully completed 10 rounds of fighting in today's training. The fourth instructor thinks that the punishment is little because he was accused of assault. The protagonist watches the man lose control and remembers that he was imprisoned for almost 10 days just because he did not follow his orders. Anyway, Ruri-Hayu opposes the instructor's decision and says that he can ask the opinion of the other instructors. If the majority believes that only the land needs to be disciplined, then she agrees. The fourth instructor understands that he can't do that, so he prefers to suspend Ian for 2 days. After the completion of the facts, the trainees leave the room. Aki seems happy with the result, but Ian remembers that his score was also halved. Trainee 425 replies that he has never experienced defeat until now, so it's good that next time Ian is prepared to take responsibility. The swordsman decides to be silent. The intern leaves and the protagonist is thoughtful. He knows that he messed up Ian's points, so he wonders if his friend will still graduate in the top 1%. At that moment, Ian touches him and asks if everything is okay. Jin replies yes. In fact, he is afraid to tell Christopher what happened. Ian says that he can be beaten in the place if the wizard wants to solve it in the same way as always, but the swordsman admits that he also wants to hit the protagonist. At this moment, Jin is in doubt about the future. It seems that Ian has a cruel temper. According to the information that the protagonist heard when he was researching the story with his mother, currently Jin can't see this cruelty in Ian. He wonders if the book is wrong. Later, Christopher received the information that his team lost 50 points. He dropped the glass with water from shock. Ian apologizes and assumes that he should have been more careful. Christopher screams in anger and asks why he is acting like this too. The scene shifts to the past. When Christopher was in his daily training, he didn't know how he could deal with the protagonist. It seems that Jin can't see the future of Ian and himself. Christopher wanted to understand why this happens. Jin's ability is unique, so he tells himself that he has to talk to the boy and understand his ability better. Christopher was so immersed in his thoughts that he broke the glass door with his magic accidentally. The students scream when they hear the sound of something breaking. Everyone is scared. Jad asks, surprised, if it was Christopher who did it. The wizard falls to the ground saying he is exhausted. It turns out that he used all his strength without realizing it. Sun approaches and asks, what is the point of destroying the training ground? To complete, Christopher broke a high-value meter. Sun tries to kick his face. Christopher creates a defensive barrier. Even so, his face receives a scratch. The mage was sure that there are at least 70 cases of material damage during training, but it seems that Sun wants to make him feel bad anyway. Christopher apologizes because he wants to avoid trouble, but Sun slaps him in the face in response. Jad and Lin look scared. Luckily, Christopher was protected with the barrier, so he almost didn't feel anything. This made the instructor even more furious. He justified his actions by saying that Christopher could have hurt his colleagues. The man was about to attempt another attack against the magician, when suddenly someone yelled at him to take care of the mess. The order was from the fourth instructor. Sun obeyed reluctantly. Jad and Lin asked if Christopher was okay. He replied yes. In fact, he was worried about the physical condition of his colleagues, but they confirmed that they were not hit. In the end, Christopher earned only 64 points. The scene changes to the current moment. Christopher told the situation to his friends and they were surprised. The wizard says that maybe his low grades are because his skills were not so good. He may also have relaxed during training and didn't notice. Anyway, Christopher wants to know if Jin can figure something out with his skill. The protagonist is silent. At that moment, Christopher takes a book from his hidden space and gives it to Jin. It's about the easy handling of mentry that even beginners can do. Jin thanked him. On the other hand, Ian was surprised. He thought that Christopher's spell was to summon weapons, but it seems that he can summon whatever he wants. Christopher says that he can actually only pick up things he left at home. He left a link there. Ian admires a lot of magic because martial arts are quite limited compared to wizards. The protagonist soon isolated himself to read the book he just won. A few hours later, the interns were sleeping peacefully in the dormitory. Christopher wakes up and gets out of bed. He puts on the intern uniform and then leaves the room. The protagonist gets up and follows the man. He is curious to know where Christopher is going after changing his intern uniform so late at night. At that moment, the wizard uses magic and passes a letter through the door of the neighboring room. The protagonist continued to follow him sneakily. Suddenly, he saw Christopher light a cigarette and smoke. Jin thought it was strange. The wizard was acting differently some days, but the protagonist didn't think he would leave the room at night to smoke. Jin begins to doubt the books he read. At that moment, he hears Sun's voice. The man shouted, asking if the wizard thought he wouldn't be discovered after passing this letter through the door. Sun questions how he thought that, when there are traces of his mentry everywhere. The instructor adds that bribery is illegal, so he shouldn't make a joke like that. The protagonist watches everything hidden behind a wall. He wonders if Christopher is teasing Sun because of the score. Maybe he wants the man to be fired. Suddenly, Sun yells, asking how an intern dares to threaten an instructor. From Christopher's expression, it is clear that he is angry about the situation. The protagonist thinks if it would be better to come out of hiding and help him. Suddenly, Christopher assumes the attack position, ready to use magic. The instructor is startled, asking if he is thinking of using spell. The protagonist was sure that Christopher was getting out of control, but at that moment, the wizard took something from the hidden space. It was a briefcase. He kindly asked Sun to accept. After all, he knows about his secret agreement with Lin, but he didn't imagine that the man was in need of money. At that moment, Christopher opens the suitcase and displays a large amount of money, which leaves Sun in shock, but he is not willing to be bribed. Sun also asks what this deal is he is talking about. Christopher is direct and says he knows that Lin is being helped. His grades are better than they should be. Sun can't escape the accusation. For him, there is no way out, so the only alternative is to accept the money, or he will be fired. But before Sun asks what he should do, Christopher just replies that he wants to be taken care of, clearly asking to improve his grades and treatment. Sun takes the suitcase of money and leaves. The protagonist is thoughtful about what he saw. He didn't imagine that Christopher would also bribe the instructor, all for his scores to improve. Jin takes advantage of the fact that his friend is alone to talk to him, so the first thing the protagonist says is that bribery is a crime. The wizard is frightened by the unexpected apparition. Jin immediately questions what he planned to do if Sun didn't accept and sent him to prison. The protagonist wasn't sure if he should interfere in Christopher's decisions. In the future, he will be someone very cruel. Bribery is just one of his many evil actions. Honestly, the protagonist is not willing to say what Christopher's sad end will be like. The wizard finally answers his question. He says he doesn't know about Sun, but he would not be easily arrested. The protagonist says that he understands. Christopher takes the opportunity to ask if Jin does not know what will happen in the future. He is curious because so far the protagonist has not alerted anyone. Christopher does not understand because his friend pretends that he does not know. Jin replies that it is not a very convenient skill because it is not possible to know everything in detail. The main events and some people come to mind, so he doesn't know everything as Christopher imagines. The wizard really thinks this ability is incredible and insists on knowing the criteria of the skill. Jin says that the man is too interested. Christopher punches the protagonist in the face while saying that he is not being very useful. Actually, he's chilling even if things aren't going well. Jin says it's because Christopher is worried about nonsense. He adds that it's better this way. His head would explode if his memory was perfect and he could even read the future. Christopher gives a smile and says he understands. There's no way he knows the importance of emotions he's never experienced. The protagonist was about to respond when he feels he is being watched. He looks for the person in the dark and sees nothing. Christopher asks if anything happened, so Jin says it was nothing. The scene changes to a few days later. It is the last day of training. After Jin's fight, Ian is called to choose his opponent. The swordsman quickly replies that he would like to train with trainee 425. Aku stares at him angrily and says that he is an idiot. Ian responds to the man to shut up and hurry. They both enter the arena. Aku says that he knows he is regretting his words now. In fact, the swordsman was eager to take him down. Trainee 425 starts the attack. His target is Ian's abdomen, because the train is sure he has found an opening. But before Aku realizes, he had blacked out. So when he opened his eyes, he saw that his face was bruised, and Ian was about to perform a new blow. The swordsman throws a precise punch. Aku tries to fight back with his fist in his stomach. Ian is silent after the attack. Trainee 425 realized he was at a disadvantage when he hit his solar plexus, and all he did was cough. After this attack, Ian got angry and made a sequence of punches against Aku. The man was beaten up a lot, making Ian think about his well-being. The swordsman asked the superiors how long he could hit. Aku is holding on so well that this fight will not end. The instructor agrees and Ian wins the duel. The protagonist perfectly understands Ian's plan. He punched trainee 425 with enough force so that he did not faint. Aku finally got up to go to the infirmary. On the way, he felt something wet between his legs. Not even the guy believed he hadn't made it to the bathroom in time. At the same moment in the magic training, Christopher was concentrated, wondering if he will get good grades from today. He is not sure because he has been being cautious since the last incident, but it does not suit him. Christopher finishes his test and is praised by his colleagues. What makes him surprised is the instructor's son. The man yells that it's the most perfect attack of that year. It seems that the bribe really worked, but Christopher decided not to get angry about it because he thought it was funny. Later, Squad 1 met and Ian displayed his first place medal in combat training. Christopher was happy with his friend's victory. He also learned that Ian earned extra points. At that moment, their conversation is interrupted by Jad. The woman enters the dorm with a drink in her hand and says that it is to celebrate the captain's title. Jad took several people to the boys' dorm, including Lin was there. Christopher asks Jad in an intimidating voice what Lin is doing in Squad 1. The girl gently replies that Lin doesn't get along very well with the interns of Team 3, so she decided to bring him to join them at least for a day. Christopher accepts as long as she takes care of any trouble Lin creates. They prepare to eat, but Jad wanted to play to improve the mood. It's a game where they bet money. She's ready to explain the prank. In the first round, just bet 500 singers per point. Christopher agrees to participate. Ian just watches from afar. He thought he had nothing to worry about, because Jad is a team leader and probably has his own plans. But a short time later, we can see Jad's disgruntled face. Christopher was surprised because he thought she knew how to play his own game. But she is losing. Jad complains that he was trying to earn money to buy wine and a good meal. But the wizard took everything. She asks for Koa's help and asks if he doesn't think Christopher is cheating. Suddenly, the leader of the third squad shouts that he is fed up. He throws his own card. It seems that the players are not happy with the development of the game. They fight among themselves. At that moment, the instructor breaks into the dormitory and catches their attention. The trainees are taken by surprise. Rurihayo warns that he heard that they were betting on the break. It was definitely something she hated, so she ordered the interns to go back to their respective dorms. In the end, Christopher and Jad continued betting, but this time it wasn't money. The wizard suggested that the loser clean the room. The girl immediately agreed, but Christopher won the bet. In the end, the two cleaned the room together. That wasn't all. After Rurihayo sent the trainees back to the dormitories, she punished the three leaders of the three teams. Jad doesn't do well with physical exercises, so she's trying to catch her breath after hours that Rurihayo was gone. Christopher was glad he wasn't the leader. The next day arrives. Koa was meeting with Team 2. He asked Jad, curious if the rings and earrings don't bother her when she fights. The sorceress replies that the earring is not an accessory, it is an essential item. Lin enters the conversation and says that there is a symbol for each magical ability. That's why his is an eyebrow piercing. Koa says she needs more information to understand. Jad decides to explain it in an easy-to-understand way. She takes a piece of paper and says it might take a while if she tries to draw something on paper and show it right away. But if a wizard has a jewel, there's no need to waste so much time. She just needs to pre-save the image in her accessories, so she can use it whenever she wants. Koa was still not satisfied with the explanation. Christopher summarizes by saying that it's just an item, so that wizards can throw things quickly. Ian says that the first thing a swordsman learns when dealing with a wizard is to first break his accessory. Christopher doesn't like to hear this and asks why he doesn't deal with monsters instead of wizards. The truth is that wizards already know this teaching, so it's extremely difficult to break their accessories. To do this, the wizard has to be eliminated first. Ian asks if these magical accessories aren't expensive. Jad feels like crying just remembering the price of his earring. It was about 200,000 singers for each side. Ian didn't expect such a high price, so he asked if his friend also bought something like that. Christopher replies that not really. The price of Regulus is very average. The protagonist followed the conversation in silence and knew that Christopher was lying. His accessory costs about 340 million, but it seems that the wizard doesn't want to reveal this to his friends. Now Christopher was curious to know why Ian wears earrings. The swordsman says he got it as a gift from a friend. Jad jokes saying that he thinks it was a gift from a girlfriend. Ian replies embarrassed that he doesn't have any girlfriend. His friends make fun of the situation. The swordsman blushed very red with the accusation. The protagonist hadn't thought about it and tried to remember if Ian really had a girlfriend, but nothing came to his mind. Suddenly he realizes that Lin is trying to fit into the group, so he decides to pay attention to the wizard. But Lin paralyzes and his cheeks turn red. Now Jin is really curious and asks if the wizard wants to say something. The intimidating voice made Lin tremble with fear. He replied that he thought Jin was also bored, since he wasn't saying anything. The protagonist understands that the boy doesn't have any friends yet, so it's normal to make an effort to get close to people. He tries to improve the situation by offering some cake. Jad is happy with the situation and hugs them both. She screamed that she wanted to be included too. That day the friends spent the day together and had fun until nightfall. At the end of the night the teams say goodbye and return to the dormitory. It was already 3 a.m. Christopher says he will change his clothes, while Ian decides to go down to the lobby to drink water. The swordsman drank his water quickly when he felt a presence. He looks around and sees a figure in the dark which slowly approaches. Ian breathes a sigh of relief when he realizes that he is the protagonist. He asks if Jin came to get water too, but the boy does not answer. Suddenly a crazy smile appears on the protagonist's face. Ian worries and asks if everything is okay. He even tries to touch the boy. But at that moment Jin runs through the lobby of the building and climbs the stairs at high speed. Ian follows his steps calmly. In a short time he arrives in his room and looks around in search of the protagonist. The swordsman sees Jin collecting something on the floor and asks worried why he ran. The protagonist does not understand the question and says that it never happened. He has always been in the room, but Ian clearly remembers seeing him run away after giving a strange smile. Jin assures that he did not leave the room at any time. He asks if the swordsman saw something strange or something. Ian just replies that he must have been confused. He apologizes for worrying his colleagues. The protagonist becomes suspicious and assumes that there may be a ghost living in the dormitory. The next day the rest ended, so Squad 1 decided to train with Squad 2. Jad was eager to finish Ian. She said that her skills improved a lot thanks to the specialized training. The swordsman was sure it wasn't enough. He was right because Jad was defeated in seconds. His team tried to understand what happened. Ian checked to see if she was alive and apologized for being so intense. A few hours later, the duel training with all the team members began. Squad 1 was the winner. Lan won both team fights but still didn't make up for the points they lost with the punishment. So now it was up to Squad 1 to beat Squad 4, which was the last group of the duel. The opponents were decided by lottery. Ian didn't seem happy when he found out the opponent. Jad asked surprised if Squad 4 is not Wen's group. She was eager to fight. Ian asked the protagonist to explain to her who Squad 4 was. At the same time, Jin said that the leader of the group is Aku. Then he told him about the punishment they took thanks to this intern. Besides that, Aku is extremely nasty. Now Jad was angry with the opponent. She promised that they would beat intern 425. Koa was surprised because he didn't know about the animosity of Team 1 against Team 4. Christopher tries to explain that things have already been resolved. Jad confessed that her friend Wen was in Squad 4 and she didn't want to fight with the girl, but there will be no other way out. At that moment, Christopher noticed Aku's look at them and concluded that the intern still hasn't recovered, so he decides to say something to Jad. His words are harsh. Christopher says that Jad is the weakest among them, so you'll have to work hard. The wizard makes it clear that he wouldn't say that if it was a personal evaluation, but his group also needs it to win. Jad replies that he will make an effort. Then Christopher says that effort is not enough. The girl asks what she can do in this short time she has until the start of the duel. Christopher points to Ian and tells Jad to carefully follow the leader's words. She must forget that she is the leader of the second squad because now Ian will give the rules. In addition, Jad should not act alone. Christopher said this because there were many times when Jad simply abandoned his teammates and ran away. She was immediately eliminated. Therefore, he makes it clear that Jad should not run away. She replies that during the fight it is difficult to hear the voice as well. Because of all the noise, Christopher finds a solution quickly. He casts a message spell on all the limbs. Now he has no excuse. Christopher explains that you just have to press it against your ear and think about the person you are talking to. Then his opinion will flow into someone else's mind. Jad can use this if he can't hear anything. Now Christopher tells the protagonist that since the score for co-op is high, he and Ian will wait there behind, while Jin fights with the other members. The protagonist asks to watch from behind as well. But Christopher says he can't, because that way he won't have anyone from Squad 1 fighting. Jin agrees, so the three squads take the fighting position, leaving only Christopher and Ian behind. The duel begins and Jad is the main target. Miller blocks Owen's path. In the sequence, Sora hits his fist precisely. Squad 4 begins to be at a disadvantage. Wen accuses the Jad squad of being brutal. At that moment, Jin attacks Aku stealthily. While the intern was distracted, the protagonist could have finished the man there if he wanted, but Christopher advised him in advance not to deal with Aku, because he wanted to do it himself. So at that moment, the protagonist dodged the punch of intern 425 and attacked the red-haired intern. On the other hand, Jad found herself surrounded by enemies. For some reason, Squad 4 was targeting her. Ian takes advantage of the moment to send a message to everyone using Christopher's spell. He warns them that they should move away when everyone in the enemy group went up to Jad. Ian also orders Sora to go and get his mentry back. While Koa and Jin stand in front, the group quickly follows the captain's orders and reorganizes. The next order is to Law and Miller. He demands that the two keep the environment under control. While Jad must prepare to give support from behind and contain any surprise attacks, Jad makes a mistake and almost leaves Koa and Jin in ashes. She apologizes for sending a sphere of fire towards them. The protagonist ended up being injured in the face because of her. At no time did Ian demand that the girl use fire. Now Jin has doubts if the books were wrong when they talked about Jad being a great mage. At that moment, he uses Christopher's spell to talk directly to the girl. He asks if she can use a little bit of her flight magic. Jad answers in the affirmative, but makes it clear that he can only use a little bit. It won't last more than 5 minutes. Jin replies that she's trying to get up. It's something heavy that really won't last more than 5 minutes. Jad says that he is being rude for talking about his weight. What the protagonist was trying to say was that maybe it would be better to lift something else instead of herself. Jad's flames are considered part of her body and can be dissipated, so he asked her to use telekinesis to control the fire directly on the targets. The girl finally understood what the emotionless intern meant. She followed the advice and at that moment managed to trap her enemies in ropes. But intern 425 managed to break the ties. Koa said she was going to keep them together, then advanced to the enemies and pushed them back. At that moment, Jad had already thrown fire and Koa was in the way. Luckily, someone saved him from being baked. It was the second time Koa was almost hit by Jad's fire on the same day. Ian and Christopher saved the poor leader of Squad 3. Christopher smiles, saying that he will now deal with Aku. His spell leaves the man pressed against the ground. Trainee 425 even tries to escape, but it's in vain. Christopher says he's eager to dispose of the remaining trash. Thanks to the work of the whole team, Group 1 achieved victory quickly. They finally got a 100. Jad ended up showing his gratitude too much by hugging the boys. They all fell to the ground celebrating the victory. At that moment, they heard someone say that they were ashamed of Group 4. It was the instructor of the rival group. The members of the fourth group were scolded by the instructor in front of everyone. A process that was soon accompanied by beatings, which surprised everyone in the arena. After that, Ian talked to his team. He didn't want things to end like this for Group 4. It seems that instructor is not a good person. At the end of the night, the winning group returned to the dormitory. Jad was still celebrating the victory. She asked surprised how Jin knew she could use the ability to fly like that. The protagonist lied, saying that he has good eyes for skills. Ian quickly intervened and said that it was one of his friend's specialties. He just wanted to prevent the protagonist from telling something about seeing the future. Anyway, Jad thanks him for the tip. It is thanks to him that she now has a better sense of her abilities. The girl also praised Koa's jump during the duel. The leader of the third squad said that all she needs to do is put mentry in the area she wants to strengthen. Then she will be able to jump in the same way. Jad replies that she can never be like him, since she is a mage. While the members talk, the protagonist has a bad feeling. He feels that he is being watched. It's the same feeling as the other day. Jad realizes that he is on alert and asks what happened. Jin asks if she heard something, but the girl says no. Protagonist soon remembers that Ian said something about seeing him smile, and then walking down the corridor of the building with light steps. For a moment, he thinks that his group collectively has sensory problems or are hearing hallucinations. Ian watches him in silence. Jin feels that things are about to get worse. The instructor had already warned that next week the training will be on the abandoned mountain. The main objective of the training is to strengthen his physical and mental strength in a shorter period of time. His mind and body will be tired with the surrounding environment being so hostile. So when everyone has experienced their worst moment, they can return to the original dormitory, but if they give up halfway through, they will have to go through the training ground again, from the beginning. The scene changes to a week later. The members arrive at the abandoned mountain. Rurihayu gave some extra information. The event is based on teams and it will be good that they can count on each other. During the event, the groups will receive items with a total of 3 skills. The first is a message item. It is for those who want to give up. They can use the item to contact her. Rurihayu adds that they can use it when they feel in danger. The item will be managed by the team leader. Now the instructor delivers 3 rings. which serves to prepare your worst-case scenario and can also track the location. Christopher puts the accessory on his finger and says that it's as if all his strength was running out. Jin had the same feeling. Ian wasn't satisfied with it. Christopher even joked that his face looked funny. Ian just said he hated this item. The wizard confirms if Jin is okay. The protagonist replied yes, but the ring won't come off your finger unless I pull it hard. Ruri-Hayu says that if it forces the item out, it will also be considered quitting. After these words, the members of Squad 1 carried out the training according to Ruri-Hayu's message, walked to the destination and slept outdoors with insects. There is no denying that it was extremely uncomfortable. Fortunately, the group found a river and they were able to wash. After the food ran out, they had to feed on plants. The protagonist admitted that he was not as used to nature as his friends. They had to sleep in a narrow space. Ian starts sweating and Christopher says that it is to overcome claustrophobia or something like that. The protagonist said it was a necessary training. Maybe they have to go into a place like this to deal with monsters. Christopher remembers that Jin had a disagreement a short time ago with an instructor. Maybe he is convincing himself that this training is fair. Jin replies that it really is his opinion. A long time ago, he was trapped with his mother in the belly of a monster. That's why he thinks it's necessary. The monster's belly was stuffy and nasty. He couldn't perform any cuts. Now Christopher is curious to know how he got out. Jin said he blocked monster's stomach acid with mentrol. Then he and his mother went down to the intestine and found a relatively weak part, then managed to escape after attacking the weak spot. This took 3 days. The scene changes to days later. After several trainings, the protagonist group received the final training schedule for the abandoned mountain. They were supposed to stay in the water for 2 days. The group looked at the beach, both thoughtful. Ian asks if Christopher can take care of it. Although it may be a bit difficult for a mage, Christopher feels offended. He creates a protective bubble against water, and with good oxygen inside, it's enough to stay 2 days underwater. The protagonist screams that he wants to stay with them inside the bubble. Christopher explains that he will have a hard time doing this. His mentry is already cut in half. He only intended to take Ian because he has more strength and endurance than everyone, but the protagonist begged to be taken too, so there was no way. A few hours later, the three were in the water, protected by the bubble. Suddenly, Christopher coughs and starts shaking. Ian asks if something is wrong. The wizard tries to catch his breath and says that his head is hurting, then asks his colleagues to be silent. Ian advises to simply release the barrier if he is having difficulties. Christopher replies that he is already fine. But at that moment, the barrier is destroyed. Christopher loses consciousness and Ian helps him. He takes the wizard to the surface. It seems that Christopher has lost mentry. Ian feels guilty for not taking care of the wizard when he got tired. The protagonist quickly holds the wizard's legs, trying not to let the water touch his body as much as possible. Jin confessed that even with the ring, he didn't expect Christopher to lose the mentry so quickly. Ian assumed that he must have been very tired throughout the training. Christopher finally wakes up but stays silent, which makes him more bored. At that moment, the protagonist has a bad feeling. He asks if his colleagues have the same feeling. Suddenly, Ian was hit in the stomach by something in the sea at high speed. Christopher and Jin get scared and try to attack the thing. The giant monster appears before them, while the protagonist and the wizard think about what to do. Ian advances towards the monster in anger and hits it. On the other hand, Jin scolds Christopher for protecting himself alone. The wizard apologizes. He forgot to put protagonist on the barrier as well. Ian approaches his friends and checks if everyone is okay. He finds it strange a monster attack because there was no mention of monsters appearing in this training. Anyway, they need to deal with this mission. The monster gets up again, so Ian asks if Christopher can summon a sword for him. The wizard takes a sword from hidden space and says that it is the only thing he has at home. It is a commercial-grade sword. It should be enough for Ian. Now he asks for the magician's help to propel him forward. Christopher throws him towards the monster. Ian makes a sequence of attack with the blade. The wizard watches impressed by the perfect cut, but the protagonist thinks it will not be enough. Suddenly, he feels something touch his foot, and the next moment he is pulled by another monster to the bottom of the sea. Jin hits him and manages to rise to the surface. Christopher tries to help him using spell, but it is in vain. At that moment, the protagonist was about to be swallowed. When Ruri-Hayu appeared and cut the monster on the neck, the appearance of the instructor was unexpected. She says that she will take care of the monsters, so the members must protect themselves. The scene changes to a while later. Luckily, Ruri-Hayu defeated the monsters. Squad 1 was curious to find out why this happened. The woman explained that they will leave the mountain early. It turns out that the appearance of the monsters was an accident. It was the first time Ruri-Hayu saved someone during training, so he is also trying to catch his breath. Christopher is surprised to hear that it was an accident. Ruri-Hayu admits that it seems to be a mistake by the training center. She bows and apologizes. Ian replies that everything is fine. The instructor says that they will come back now. A few minutes later, Squad 1 returns to the dormitory. Ruri-Hayu says he is going to get some tea. The boys enjoy the opportunity to talk. Christopher says that they went through all these problems because of someone, so there is no other way out but to face and deal with it. Jin and Ian agree. After a few minutes, Rurihaya returns to the dormitory and tells the group to go to the table, but at that moment she realizes that the boys were so tired that they slept on the floor, in which case she decides to leave them alone. The next day, the protagonist is the first to wake up and realizes that he has fallen asleep on the floor. Fortunately, someone has covered him with a sheet. But later the three squads met for breakfast. Jad told that she almost frozen. Her fire ability quickly went out when she entered the sea. Jad adds that she heard from Yuan that the Acu couldn't take it, and gave up. Really, the training was very bad. Christopher says that he can freak out if he is forced to enter the water again. Jad takes the moment to ask what everyone's goals are for the future. Koa says that for now he would like to study with the 6th grade master. Ian realizes that the intern cares a lot about the relationship with the maritime forces. Koa replies that it is the most important thing for his future. The maritime company is responsible for all the amazing things that an intern can enjoy. Sea soldiers are known to be strict. Even people who have a hobby of annoying other people don't want to get caught by them, as this can be a big loss. Christopher says he was only planning to get to level 3, but his leader said he had the goal of being an opper. So now, he will have to aim even higher to help him. Jad screams in surprise, asking if Ian really wants to be an opper. Sora says that Ian better not forget them when he becomes famous later. The swordsman laughs and says he won't forget. Jad says he's sure he'll make it. The protagonist listens to everything in silence and tells himself that Ian won't be an opper. Miller says that the test for opper happens every 3 years, and it takes an average of 12 years to reach level 1, which is the qualification requirement for the exam, so he thinks that Ian can achieve this feat. The swordsman plans to take the exam in 3 years. Everyone is surprised because they expected him to wait longer. Christopher asks how Ian intends to get to the 1st grade in 3 years. The swordsman asks to put this subject aside, so he asks how far Jad wants to go. The woman says she wants to get to the 4th grade, although the 5th grade is her dream. Ian understands that she is insecure. At that moment, Jin tells the girl that she can aim higher. It won't be difficult for her to reach a great place. Jad smiles happily and squeezes Jin's cheeks. She's happy with his support because this doesn't happen normally. The scene changes to some time later. Squad 1 returned to the dormitory. The protagonist expected that he is sleepy. After all, it is already 2 in the morning. He decides to get some fresh air. Jin walks alone outside the dormitory. Fortunately, the training was close to ending. The protagonist is more concerned with the issue of maritime affairs. He has already lied to Ian about seeing the future, so he fears that the boy will ask new questions. Suddenly, Jin's thoughts are interrupted by a sudden rain. He decides to go back to the dormitory when he suddenly feels that he is being followed. The boy looks around with a bad feeling. This time the sound is a little different than usual. Jin follows instinct when he suddenly stumbles upon someone's body. He looks at the person and realizes that it is Jad. The girl is on the ground badly injured. The protagonist quickly gets up and checks if she is still breathing. He is horrified to realize that the girl is not alive. Jin goes back to the dorm to tell his friends.